Hello, so this week we are going to review factoring. Factoring is one of the most important concepts of Algebra 1, so we need to make sure that everyone remembers how to factor before you move on to the next year of math and geometry, Algebra 2, etc. So factoring is also one of my favorite lessons because it's not that bad and it's really, really important. So what we're going to do first is learn how to factor a trinomial. So you've done this before. So we have an A, a B, and a C number. So whenever we have three pieces, the first number is A, the second is B, and the third is C. Now my A value, there's no number there, so there is an invisible 1. So what we did when we factored, and you guys will remember this once we get started, is we did something called an X puzzle. The easiest way to remember is because we have x squared and we are factoring, so we draw an x. So to factor, what we do is we take our A number times our C number and we put it on the top. Then we take our B number and we put it at the bottom. So what we have here, A times C. So A is 1 times C is 3. 1 times 3 is the number 3. B is the number in the middle. B stands for bottom, so I'm going to put a 4 on the bottom of my x. So now to solve an x puzzle, what we do is we figure out what multiplies to make 3, but adds to make 4. So I'm going to write my factors of 3. The only things that would multiply to make 3 are the numbers 1 and 3, because 1 times 3 equals 3. So now 1 plus 3 is 4. So this is how we know that we are correct. So those are the factors that multiply to make the top number. These multiply to make this top number, and they add to make the bottom number. So now, here's a really awesome shortcut that some of us went into a little bit more detail of, but this will make your life so much easier. What you need to know is that if your problem starts with an x squared, what that means is your answer has to have x's in front. The reason why is because x times x is x squared. So whenever there's x squared, all we need to do is write your factors directly into the parentheses. So my answer is x, we have a positive 1, and plus 3, because we have a positive 3. So now this is factored. Okay, so we factored it by drawing the x, and whatever your factors are what gets to go in parentheses. So we got to jump straight to this answer because there's an x squared without a number in front. So x times x makes x squared. Then if you were to double distribute all of these numbers, you would end up with this answer right here. Okay, so I want you to try the same thing with number 2. So again, factoring is an x puzzle. An x puzzle means you take A times C over B. On this worksheet, in this entire video notes, what we have is when you have an x squared in front, your answer has an x in the front. And then just plug in those factors, whatever factors you get as your answer, what multiplies to make that and what adds to make that, those are the numbers that you're going to plug in right here. Okay, so let's try number 3. Same idea, we're just factoring, not difficult. So I'm going to draw an x. I'm going to label, so this is my A number, my B number, and my C number. So A is 1, because that's a 1x squared. So A times C, 1 times 12 is 12. B goes on the bottom, so I put an 8 on the bottom. So now I write my factors of 12. 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. So which of those factors would add to make an 8? Here they are, 2 and 6. So what that means is that my final answer is that we have an x plus 2 and an x plus 6. Those are the factors where if you multiplied them together, you'd end up with this trinomial. Okay, try the same thing with number 4. Draw an x, figure out what multiplies to make 10, but adds to make 7, and then write them as factors in ordered pairs with parentheses. I'm sorry, with numbers in parentheses. Okay, number 4. All right, let's move on to number 5. Again, when I have a trinomial, I'm always going to draw an x. I'm going to label, this is my A, my B, and my C. A times C is the number 20. B is the number negative 12. So I'm going to start by figuring out what multiplies to make 20. 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. So which of these numbers can be manipulated to be added to make the number 12? So what we know is that 2 and 10 make 12. However, to make it into a negative 12, we need this to be negative 2 and negative 10. Negative 2 times negative 10 is 20. Negative 2 plus negative 10 is negative 12. So what we end up here is we end up with an x minus 2 and an x minus 10. So those are my factors. Because we started with an x squared, we had to start this with x. Okay, so try the exact same idea with number 6. Draw your x, find your factors, figure out which multiply to make 9, and add to make negative 6. Go ahead, try number 6. Okay, so now we're going to move on to number 7. So number 7 is exactly the same thing. We're still factoring. It's a trinomial, so I need to break it into its factors. But this time there's an equal sign. And what equal signs mean is we have to solve for x. Then there's one more piece which we'll talk about here in just a second. So we'll start with the factor and then the solve portion of this. So in number 7, we have a trinomial. Anytime we have a trinomial, we draw an x. Remember, tri means 3. So it has 3 terms. So what I have an A, a B, and a C. A times C is the number 6. B goes in the bottom, that's a 5. So what multiplies to make 6 but adds to make 5? Let's see. 2 times 3 multiplies to make 6. 2 plus 3 adds to make 5. So those are my factors. So I'm going to write them in parentheses, x plus 2 and an x plus 3. Those are the factors. We just factored that trinomial. We turned it from a trinomial into 2 factors. So now in this one here, there's an equals 0. So I'm going to put equals 0 in the back of this equation. So what that means, when we solved, we've done this before, you have to take x plus 2 equals 0 and x plus 3 equals 0. So we just solve for x. We would subtract 2 to both sides to get x by itself. So x equals negative 2. Then we subtract 3 on the left. We subtract 3 on the right. So that means x equals negative 3. Okay, so I factored it, which means I turned it into 2 parentheses. I solved, which means I set them equal to 0. So the last thing says sketch a graph. So if you guys remember before we left for spring break, which feels like a little while, we talked about this thing called quadratics. What quadratics are is that it's a U shape. We talked about solutions. These are the solutions of a quadratic. The solutions are negative 2 and negative 3. So I'm going to sketch it. What that means is I'm going to put a dot on negative 3, and I'm going to put a dot on negative 2, and then I'm going to draw a U shape to connect it. So this is a graph. The graph looks like this. The solutions, or the x's, or the x-intercepts, are where it touches the x-axis. So I factored it. I set them equal to 0 and solved for x. And then that tells me exactly where my x-intercepts of that graph would have been. Seems like a lot, but once you do a few, it's not too bad. So try number 8. Factor, set them equal to 0, solve for x, and graph. When you're ready, let's take a look at number 9. Same thing. A times C goes on the top. B goes on the bottom. What I have here, to make 20, that's 1 times 20, 2 times 10, and 4 times 5. which of those factors would add to make the number 9? Right here, 4 and 5. So my factors, this is the same as saying x plus 4 and x plus 5 equals 0. Because there is an equal sign, I have to solve. I'm not done yet. So to solve, we set both pieces equal to 0. X plus 4 equals 0. X plus 5 equals 0. When I solve for x, I get x equals negative 4. Same thing here, minus 5, minus 5. So x equals negative 5. So I factored it. I turned it into 2 parentheses. I solved it. I set them equal to 0 and solved for x. So then the last thing says we need to graph this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when we graph it, we're going to put a dot at negative 5 and a dot at negative 4. We're going to connect our dots with a U shape, and that is the equation. That's the picture of this function. So this function looks like this. Whee! So we have 2 solutions, and we got those solutions by factor and solve. Okay, try the same thing with number 10. All right, we've got one last one to do together and one more for you to do on your own, and then we are done with video notes 1. So again, as always, A, B, C. So my A number times my C number, A is 1, C is 12. 1 times 12 is 12. B goes to the bottom, that's a negative 8. I need factors of 12. 1 times 12, 2 times 6. I like to put the smaller number on the left. 3 times 4. So which of those numbers can be manipulated to make an 8? Well, 2 and 6 would make 8. But in order for it to be a negative 8, we'd have to have a negative 2 and a negative 6. So negative 2 times negative 6 is positive 12. Negative 2 plus negative 6 is negative 8. So I just write my factors, x minus 2 and x minus 6. And then as an equal sign. When there's an equal sign, you have to do one more step and set it equal to 0. When we factor, there isn't always an equal sign. Sometimes you're done with just this green answer. But if there's an equals, then we have to keep going. So we need to see what x equals. To solve for x, I would add 2 to the left and add 2 to the right. So x equals 2. Add 6, add 6. So x equals 6. So then if I graph this, I'm going to throw this on a graph. One of my x's is 2, so I'm going to put a dot on the x-axis at 2. The other solution, the other x-intercept is 6. I connect my dots, and I make a U. So that is the factored, solved, graphed version of this equation. Okay, one more. Try number 12. Draw the x, set it equal to 0, and then graph your 2 solutions. Very easy. Okay, we have one more video for this week, so head on over to video notes 2 whenever you're ready. So 1 through 12, and then head over to video notes 2.